Any religion. Okay. So it's my religion. Yes.
I'll just mention that back in the '90s when the young people were just getting on the internet, I hosted an online learning community that was populated both by adults and young people. And from time to time, we would have conversations about topics of interest. And one night, we had a conversation about bullying. And because this was in text, I saved the chat. I saved the whole text chat, and it's been up on my website, for what is 25 years now. If you want to see what young people of Maxwell's age talked about on the topic of bullying 25 years ago, I can dig up the link and you can read literally. It's like the transcript here. You can read the chat, and in particular, the smartest young woman in the group, I think she was in 7th or 8th grade, talked about how she dealt with an episode of bullying in middle school. And it was quite an interesting session, one of the most memorable sessions in 5 or 10 years of this group getting together.
So again, I'm going to try and minimize the amount of talking I do because of my extraction. Did my accent or voice change because of my dental work?
I didn't hear anything.
Barry, you're on.
It sounded quieter.
I think the muddiness of your mic, which is a recurring problem, is more of a factor than your missing tooth.
It's muddy now? I'll go listen to the recording and see how muddy it is.
Yeah, it's not inaudible. It's just that there's a kind of a low level muddiness.
I might bust out one of my other microphones then.
I have to turn off my woofer.
And Sam, I wanted to thank you for making that connection between bullying and the possibility of war. And this goes to show too, I confess that I don't know what they're teaching sometimes. I don't know if they're teaching, well, I know that from my own experiences, all of history was basically kind of muddled a little bit. They dumbed it down and simplified it to the point where it's like, oh, well, I don't know if that's the way to go. But it was nice to see Maxwell saying, well, yeah, they don't teach us about that stuff.
They usually don't explain the emotional or psychological factors that determine how a world leader decides what to do. So, Biden called this a war of choice, but George W. Bush had 2 wars of choice. So wars of choice where we're not under threat. We just decided to go in and meddle in another country because we didn't like the way the other country was functioning. Essentially, Putin would rather have Ukraine be, rebuild the Soviet Union. Putin was upset that the Soviet Union dissolved, and Lincoln was upset when the United States was breaking apart, wanted to bring it back together. It was psychologically, it was maintain the unity of a federation. We started with 13 colonies, now we're 50 states. And from time to time, there are states who would rather separate again and become their own independent country, like Texas, which was an independent country at one time. So this phenomenon of, do we want to be part of a federation and have an overlord in Washington or the Kremlin, or do we want to be independent, autonomous states and not have to answer to some central government? This is a recurring issue throughout, the world, including in North America.
So I think it'd be interesting to bring back that United Nations Declaration on Human Rights. It was either 1961 or 63, one of those early 60s years, on self-determination. Do we really believe?
It should be compulsory. Make it compulsory for every country member.
Yeah.
Anyway, I've got to go and get some sleep, so bye, everyone.
Night, Alex.
Alex said make it compulsory. What was it a reference to?
He might have been referring to the UN Declaration on Human Rights, self-determination. I thought that's what he meant.
Okay, I'm not quite sure how to decode that, but okay, I'll let it go.
I might have gotten that pronoun wrong. I don't know, but that's what it sounded like to me. So next week, I actually have a small list of 3 or 4 items that hopefully will be good to talk about.
Okay.
But I didn't want to bring it up here with just like 23 minutes left.
Do we want to at least know what it is so we can do our homework in advance?
Nope.
Nope.
But I'll tell you what it is, though. I actually looked at the kind of interactions that I see on Facebook, both in GCC and elsewhere.
Yeah.
And those prompt me to write notes into my Saturday barn raising topics list. So it won't be a surprise when it gets brought up. And by the way, just to maybe give away part of it, that post you made, Barry, about pseudoscience, I think was, it generated quite a lot of good interaction.
It did. It did. Yeah. Martin Gardner wrote a couple of really good books. I don't know if you recognize the name. Martin Gardner.
Scientific American. Yes.
Yeah, Mathematical
Decades.
Games. He wrote at least one, if maybe more than one book on both science, good, bad, and bogus, I think is the best known. But he talked a lot about, how to do science authentically and how to do science badly or bogusly or pretend to be doing science and misleading yourself. So yeah, this is a recurring issue, How do we distinguish authentic science from pseudoscience or bogus science?
Yeah.
And not fooling yourself as well as trying to fool others or ending up.
Also, the Feynman video that you posted as part of that thread was also quite good.
Yeah, I love that. Fine. When I saw that video with Feynman, it didn't have a transcript. And I actually spent probably a couple hours actually making a correct transcript to go with what he said, because the live transcripts on YouTube are usually pretty awful, and they're not in one page of readable text.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I love Feynman.
Yeah.
First,
I'd like to have a copy of that
fool
transcript.
yourself, and you're the easiest person to fool.
Is that the one where he does the sitting in the armchair with the blue shirt on?
No, that's much later. That was after he
Okay.
retired. This was actually a lecture to I think a class in Australia, if I'm not mistaken. He had made a pilgrimage to Australia and did a series of lectures to an auditorium, and the people in the university there recorded them. It's one of the very few lectures where he was recorded.
Interesting.
He did one there on the photon, which is really nice. Here's Kayla back again. He did one on the photon, which is really nice, but it's more of a physics technical one as opposed to this broad. What is the concept of science itself?
And that was the one you posted? That was the one you posted, was it?
The one I posted was the philosophy of science. How do you discover a new law? Basically, that was the question. How in science do we discover and validate a new law? And it's
Got a few criteria. There's 3 or 4 criteria, isn't there?
First,
Sorry?
guess it.
Yes, first you guess it, which is just basically say you form a hypothesis, which may or may not be a good guess, and then you test it. And he explained what that meant. And
I thought a law was something was wider than just a theory, because it actually takes in a little bit of a domain with it.
Yeah, it's pretty broad. But he says, you make a guess, and then with the guess, you make a prediction that if the guess were true, this should happen. And if you do an experiment or take a measurement and it doesn't agree with the prediction, then the guess was wrong. And he does this gesture. He says that's the essence of science. If the prediction from the guess doesn't agree with reality, then it's wrong. Try again, find a better guess.
Yeah.
But ignoring the evidence of the outcome of the experiment, that's just a common mistake. You do an experiment, it doesn't agree with your prediction, so you sort of you you sort of fool yourself into thinking there was something wrong with the experiment.
Ah, you mean like my configuration file for X hours where it was just quoted versus non-quoted was the issue.
Oh, I don't know what that's a
Had
reference.
nothing to do with the error messages.
In the cold fusion fiasco, they really, they had the wrong hypothesis, and they were ignoring all of the evidence that was overthrowing the hypothesis. They were the so-called diehards. There was people who were departing from the protocols of the scientific method in subtle but substantively and profound ways, and fooling themselves. We're down to just a few of us left. Joshua,
Sam
did
might be in
you
pain.
have something you wanted to bring up before we run out of things to talk about?
I'm racking my brain to think if there's anything I can add. I just keep thinking about what Stacy said earlier in the conversation about, what's going on in the world. Did we ask the religious leaders what they think, or what's, and what keeps coming up for me in so many conversations is, are we viewing reality properly? And from what perspective? And I keep seeing people trying to invoke science and atheism. And some people are trying to do science and theology and like, what are gods? And I was in a long conversation this week about, what is God and what does God think? And can you talk about that intelligibly? Can you really, without invoking all this emotion, and can you make a logical case for what God thinks?
Yeah.
So how did that go?
There was two people overpowering everyone and calling everyone stupid if they didn't agree with what they thought. And this really smart theologist came in and told them that their logic was wrong, and they just felt dumb, so they just bullied over him.
Yeah.
You can do system science, authentic system science, which is really hard to do because it's graduate level precision thinking. And if you do precision graduate level systems thinking and you do it well, you'll come out with the same conclusions that many theologians proposed ages ago.
Mm-hmm.
And that's really the astonishing thing, is that it's just very, very good systems thinking. So a deity is some imaginary character who's really, really good at systems thinking.
Yeah,
right.
And I noticed they kept anamorphizing God as a he, and I wanted to speak up and say the logic is wrong. You're calling God a person, and how can God be a person if God is omnipotent and created everything? It's beyond a human understanding. So the logic it's circular logic. It just ends up looping around. And I think a lot of society and humanity and everything going on just ends up looping. And I'm a big proponent of the journalists and people trying to find the truth and saying, okay, well, what is the objective? What is, the intention? Why are people, ask the why, the hard why questions. Why are they doing this? Like, it's not that easy. With the bully situation, the kid, why is he a friend of Maxwell and then now he's mean to Maxwell? Like, what happened?
He probably doesn't know he's mean. He thinks he's doing a good thing by bringing Maxwell an interesting problem. This got the bully's interesting problem, but he's not articulating it, that saying, hey, Maxwell, I have this unsolved problem in my life. Can you help me think about it? Instead of doing that, he's simply recreating an instance of it.
Projecting, yeah.
Yeah, and that's a very common phenomenon, and it takes a long time to realize that this guy is simply recreating an instance of an unsolved problem to see if somebody else can solve it and act back a workable solution.
Yep. I just, not to quote Michael Jackson, but I really think Michael Jackson was emotionally very intelligent pop artist that could communicate to the populace. And that's why people liked him. And one of his famous songs was, I'm starting with the man in the mirror. I'm starting with me. Right. And I think he said right in the song, no message can defend any clearer. If you want to make the world a better place, take the look at yourself and make a change.
Right.
And I think Gandhi said the same type of thing. I think every great leader says, if you want to do something really wonderful, love yourself. And I think that's what I see with the bully is, how can that bully be given love in a way that he's not hurting anyone, not Maxwell or anyone else? Like, how can he love and get the love that he needs, that he's so craving?
Or get empathy. I mean, I have to come out and
Derek?
say, I'm vexed. Oh, I'm sorry, Kayla has her hand up.
Yeah,
Go ahead.
Kayla's got her hand up for a while.
Oops. Okay. I just want to give you a little bit of background about that too, a little bit more detailed. So in our neighborhood, or the child's parents actually came from, you know, a divorced parent, but the father was.
We're recording. We're recording again.
Yes, I know.
Okay. Okay, very good.
You know, and this is really important for me to express, because the father, unfortunately, was murdered a couple of summers ago. And I don't know the true dynamics of the family, but I do know that they were separated. So the shift in behavior is, you know, it's kind of on point with what's going on with this family, unfortunately. And without giving Maxwell details, I did express to him, like, you know, something happened to his dad. Unfortunately, his dad's not here anymore. But it's still, you know, when it comes to kind of standing up and defending yourself, I was still like, but it's still wrong what he's doing to you. You know, but just keep that in mind. But anyways, I don't know why or how, or if this family is actually getting help. It's their thing. And but it's just interesting to me that you know, in violence, like, violence does nothing but cause more violence, you know. Trauma, if left unattended, is going to continue.
Right.
And I think that's what's happening here.
Yeah.
Specifically with Maxwell. In the world, I don't know. I can only, you know, have my theories on that, but I think it's along the same issues. Or somebody is kind of greedy and they want something that somebody doesn't have.
Yeah. It's grief. The kid has unprocessed grief, and he's passing the grief along to everybody else. Can show me how to process my grief.
Yep.
And so maybe, you know, if Maxwell can understand a little bit about grief and how do you process grief in a socially acceptable, constructive way, he could act that back. But maybe Maxwell doesn't realize that the kid's coming from a state of unprocessed grief.
The reason for the bullying could be justified, but that doesn't excuse it.
It's explainable, not justified.
It's explainable, but it's not.
It has an organic cause, which can be understood. I'm assuming that Maxwell doesn't know that the father was murdered.
Well, I'm just about to say that because I don't think that secret would be able to be kept at my school.
Well, Maxwell may or may not have evidence to that effect, but probably hasn't been confirmed by a reliable source.
Oh, it's been confirmed. I just don't elect to tell him that bit of advice. You know, it's the good thing about this community. It's so small that, you know, nothing gets past anybody in the community.
Yeah.
But they are so, because we were in such close quarters. I mean, we had a lot of respect and empathy for each other's spaces.
Yeah.
You know, whereas when I moved
Yeah.
here in Ventura, like, I have to tell my neighbors, I don't care if they're loud, as long as there's no crazy violence and it's not past a crazy hour. As a matter of fact, I'd like to be invited to their parties. You know, and I had to establish that with my neighbors here in Ventura, as opposed to in Somis, it was already kind of established. Like, everybody knew who we were once we moved in. I mean, we stuck out like sore thumbs. So we all watched each other's kids. And even though everybody knows the story of that family, they've been doing such a good job kind of protecting the kids against the violent truth of it all. Still doesn't excuse the
yes.
bullying though.
No, but yeah, but it
Kids,
comes down
kids
to
become preoccupied with other things quickly.
it
if
does
you
come down
don't
to
dwell on it.
unprocessed grief. I mean, in my childhood, my parents' generation had the grief of the Holocaust because I was born just as the Second World War was ending, and they didn't pass their grief along to my generation. We learned about it, 15 years later when we were, in high school or something. But yeah, unprocessed grief sort of burbles around, and most kids are too naive to understand this subtlety of what is all this unprocessed grief that's being transformed into, meanness or depression or what other,
Yeah.
unlovely, unbecoming behaviors are circulating.
Understandable. Well, interesting.
Joshua has his hand up.
Yeah, I'm just curious to try to understand the Ukraine situation a little bit more. Is anyone familiar with I heard it talked about, but I have a Minsk agreement, and it was agreement about shelling the part of the Donbass area, I think it's called, the part that's close to Russia. They weren't supposed to be shelling that area 8 years. They had an agreement not to be aggressive towards that area, and that they didn't keep that agreement. Does anyone know about that?
I haven't looked into that.
That was actually referenced in a post that a friend of mine, Emine Dilek, who is Turkish, had posted that it was either her or somebody else. I may be mistaken. But anyway, she did reference this 8 years in the Donbass area where it was not a clear-cut situation that Ukraine was just being victimized and Russia was the big bully. And rather than going into details about that, I just wanted to indicate that there's much more history to all of this. Her post, by the way, concluded or led with a statement that if you think Ukraine is a innocent victim, none of you know history. And so that got me to really look more. I still have to look more into it, but that's why I say, none of these situations are clear cut. Still doesn't justify shelling nuclear reactors and killing innocent civilians, but it's a big, long history. And yes, I did hear those references, Josh.
Yeah, and I'm also interested to know what happened in 2013 with the change of the guard from the former leader of the Ukraine.
Yeah.
And to me, it seems like, when Russia was broken up, they need a buffer zone between the alliance that was formed with the, NATO, and this country that's saying, okay, we're going to break up our country, but we want to have some sort of balance. And, it was a big deal to open up that area. And that zone right now is a very rich place right now in order to move our economy forward. A lot of countries need what the Ukraine offers and that buffer zone of bringing energy and oil and gas into Europe. I can see why they're fighting over it. I just wish they could fight over it in a way that everyone have a win-win situation, not a win-lose. And what confuses me the most is I talk to veterans that were in Afghanistan fighting that war, because that's another area that is rich with resources and in between different parts of the world. And I find it strange that the United States is still buying oil from Russia. And we are in business with Russia. And then we act like, oh, we hate Russia, they're our enemies. Well, then why are you doing business with your enemies? Like, what? To me, it's just like there's this underlying industrial military complex that we were warned against in the 1950s that could get out of hand. And here we are in 2022, and the industrial military complex doesn't have anyone's best interest in mind except for the industrial military complex to help them keep growing and take trillions of dollars from our hard-earned tax money of the United States and spend that in a place that is going to advance their agenda, not the agenda of the people. And that's what I see is going on. Is there's these new bombs that are called thermite bombs that are just absolutely devastating, almost miniature atomic bombs and they're using them in this war. I don't know if you guys saw that video that was just posted this week where one of those thermite bombs went off. The guy was talking and the whole sky flashed of light, but it sucks the oxygen out of a 100-meter area and will actually explode people's lungs if they're in that area. So it's basically a miniature nuclear bomb. And the United States used those bombs in Afghanistan in 2017. You can look up the video and watch those bombs go off, but they're miniature nuclear bombs, and they're cost $314 million, and they're quite devastating. They're not like they're different than these, those targeted missiles from the drones, which are also devastating, but this is a whole nother, if you ever watch the movie Iron Man, in the beginning of the movie, they show these weapons that are just completely devastating. This was actually 10 times more devastating than the weapons in a fictional movie in Hollywood. And this is in real life. And I just get into time. Even thought of the war.
Anybody hear Josh?
He's losing his Starlink.
Yeah, Starlink is going in and out. I think China is destroying Starlink right now. I don't know what's going on. I don't know if you can hear me. Am I back?
Yeah, you're back. You're solid again. You were breaking up there for about
Starlink going in and out. So
Josh, where did you say that bomb imploded? The video that you were talking about?
The video was, I believe, either a CBS or NBC news reporter, and there was just a giant flash, and everyone didn't know what it was.
In Ukraine.
In the Ukraine, it went off in the Ukraine. The Russians are using thermite weapons.
Is that the same as thermobaric, or is that different?
Thermobaric, that's exactly it.
Okay.
And I'm just, my point is, and I'll let you speak, Sam, is we have too much devastating weapons to even be thinking about going to war, because it's analogous to dropping an atomic bomb. It's just a small atomic bomb. And I think we should not have war. If we can just kill that many people so fast, it'll just devastate the entire human population.
Russia used that in Aleppo in Syria. They used thermobaric bombs. And now there's peace in Aleppo because nobody's living there anymore. The place is empty of people because of thermobaric bombs.
Sam?
So I think I referenced this last week, that when people were trying to explain why there was this war in Ukraine, there's a very long, very detailed graphic that talks about this mineral, that mineral, this much natural resources, and that was just repellent to me, because it just said war is about, again, profit and getting better than than your share. And that entire graphic had no reference to people. So every time I see that graphic, my first and only comment is people, ...
But I think that's what it's trying to point out, that they tell us it's about people. They tell us we're going in to save people, but it's really not.
See, to me, that whole issue is the fact that we don't have a fourth estate. We don't have journalism in any professional sense anymore. It was for hundreds of years a safety net for the commons to actually make sense and then to vote in an informed way. That sense of responsibility by any journalistic endeavor has completely gone away. And I don't even believe in the fair, what is it called? The fairness doctrine, that if you present one side, you have to present the other. That's a stupid thing in my mind also, Why do you have to present an idiot that thinks an idiot thing just because you present the truth, quote unquote? So this whole notion though, oh, you got your truth and that person has their truth, that's the foundation of this idiot fairness doctrine. And why do people not see that? That should be like journalism 101.
It's Theology 101, bear accurate witness. Bearing accurate witness goes all the way back to the 10 Commandments. The theologians had this long before feedback control theory made it the fundamental theorem of feedback control theory. If you don't bear accurate witness, no control system can do its job. You've got to know exactly the state of affairs to know which way to steer. If your windshield is frosted over, it doesn't matter that you got control. You don't know where you are.
I would add to that, we have these technologies to do horrific things with wars, but we also have the technology to do beautiful things with bearing accurate witness.
Right.
And some of my friends this last week decided to find the ham radios that the Russians are talking on, go to the internet and download the audio of these conversations, and then take out the muddledness and translate it into text, and then translate it from Russian to English. And so we have a room in a Discord, not Discord, but it's called Element. It's a more secure Discord server, because these are my anonymous friends, so they're very smart about encryption. But we put it into an Element server on Matrix, and you can listen in real time to, well, not real time. If you speak Russian, you can listen in real time. But if you speak English, you can wait for the transcript to come out, which is usually 20 minutes after. And they're posting, as much as they can to try to bear accurate witness of what the soldiers that are fighting, a lot of them, I'm sure, are just, like all soldiers, they need money and they're poor, and Putin is offering 37,000 US dollars for Russian soldiers bonuses if they go and fight in this war. And it's, it's a money thing where, hey, I got to weigh my options. I have a country that's, the economy is collapsing because their dollar, their ruble is not worth a lot of money. And people are just trying to survive. And it's so sad to pit poor people against other people. Like, I don't see Americans getting their most educated, most, economically rich people going to war. I don't see anyone that is highly intelligent and has an affluent life would not want to fight another person in the way that they could lose. They have too much to lose. It's people that have less to lose that fight.
Ruble's worth about a penny, a little less than a penny.
In other words, I think we need to help our poor people around the world. And I'm working with a lot of agencies and a lot of places. One of the things that I'm really passionate about is getting solar and electric lights to third world countries, especially in Africa, so that they don't have to burn soot and burn things to get light. That concept is really just outdated. And for pennies on the dollar, you can light up someone's house at night, and changes the way that they're able to learn at night. Like, a lot of people don't know that, I lived up in the woods. When our electricity went out, I couldn't do my work at night because I didn't have light. And I know that feeling. It's a really hard feeling. I don't think a lot of us have experienced unless they've been camping recently. But when you want to read and there's no light, it's really hard. And I when I was a kid, I was in the mountains in the Himalayas up where the Dalai Lama lives. And I couldn't read because, I was in a room with my parents and they were going to sleep. So I would take candles and go up on the roof and read as many. That's where I got my education. I had nothing to do. There was no TV. There was nothing. So I had to get books off the street and just read, Stephen Hawking's, and I read Roots. I read Gone with the Wind. I would get books, the longest books I could get, because I was so bored. There was nothing to do up there. I didn't speak the language. I was young, and that's where I got my education, was just learning by candlelight. And that's why I got my glasses. I think all that reading by candlelight messed up my eyes a little bit. So anyway, I think we can help people not be poor. And if they're not poor, they're not easily manipulated into doing things they don't want to do.
Right. Yeah. Going to the military was a way out of poverty for a lot of people in US and a lot of other countries.
Yeah. There's, like, in my life, I've had rich bullies, I've had poor bullies, and usually the rich bullies was because their parents were bullying them.
Right.
But the poor bullies were taking out the frustrations of their parents' frustrations of being poor.
Right.
And some of the kids I met in Santa Barbara, I gave their brother a job at my company, and they were so grateful, these young 15-year-old kids, they offered for me to beat up anybody I wanted to, just tell them and they'll beat them up. And I was like, why would you do that? They said, because if I go to juvenile hall, I get away from my parents, and I would much rather be in juvie than be at home and have to hear what my parents are saying to me.
Wow.
So yeah, and that really affected me, because I was like, you guys are 15, you guys should be having fun, not out there trying to go to jail. Like, it didn't make any sense to me that their life was that miserable. So I went to the parents' house, and I realized the kids were just, you know, they weren't seeing reality clearly. They didn't see what their parents were going through, and they didn't understand why their parents were being so mean to them. And yeah, I think a lot of people are struggling. I think if you don't live in the poorest parts of the world and spend time with those poor people, you don't understand that struggle.
Struggle is an interesting word. In one language, the word struggle is jihad. In another language, the word struggle is kampf, as in mein Kampf. Literally, my struggle. Jihad means struggle. And Israel, the country named Israel, it's struggles with God. That's what it means. Israel means struggles with God. Struggling is everybody struggles. We're vexed and perplexed. We're struggling.
Yeah, and everyone doesn't have someone to talk to. I just noticed, like, Qcella is just starting a campaign to help healthcare workers in the large hospitals in the West Coast, because they're struggling to keep everyone's sanity after COVID. It's a really hard thing.
Yeah.
A lot of people are dealing with severe mental issues.
PSTD and depression and
Yep.
kinds of issues. Yeah. We're all struggling.
Well, I hope we can be friends to each other. I think that's the only way out of this solution, is to find out what other people like to do for fun and spend more time doing that than dealing with the struggle, and somehow that can balance it out. Like these conversations on Saturday. Thank you.
So I was going to ask about economy. What's going on with our dang economy? Gas prices are crazy right now.
Yes.
I got interesting news about the economy, Kayla.
And then also on that note, Josh, because I was looking at solar panels myself, I'm looking into buying a hybrid or a full-on electric vehicle. Anyway, that's my thoughts. Go ahead, economy, go for it.
Oh, I was just going to say there's a show on Apple TV, and it's also on YouTube. It's called The Problem with Jon Stewart. And this last week.
Oh, Josh, you froze again. Wait for him to unfreeze. Waiting for him.
Check 1, check 2. Am I back?
All right. So you left off with the problem with Jon Stewart is?
Jon Stewart has a show called The Problem. And if you type in The Problem on YouTube, he did a whole episode on the economy and talked to a lot of people working directly in the Treasury, people working in the stock market, the SEC, the regulator. He was on the show explaining how the stock market works. And one of the facts that I got out of it was that 70% of the economy is hidden. We're not bearing witness to it because it's not part of the stock market, whereas 30% of the economy is the stock market. And we're using that metric of 30%, saying that's the whole economy of the United States. And that was the biggest thing I got out of it, is that 70% of our economy is not being tracked and measured on the stock market.
Yeah.
And that's why we can't get a good grip on what's going on with the economy.
Go to the grocery store and look at the empty shelves. No matter how much money you have, you can't buy fruit juice if there isn't any in the store.
Yep. And I'm getting fruit juice from Turkey right now. I got a pomegranate juice from Costco and it says made in Turkey.
Because that's where they make the pomegranates.
Yep.
Grapefruit juice is unavailable. Orange juice is unavailable.
Come to my house. I've got freshly squeezed orange juice. I've got these huge cherimoyas dropping on my lawn because it's windy over here.
Yeah.
I've got kumquats and loquats.
All right, stop bragging about Ventura.
My backyard's very sustainable.
Is it enough to feed 3 people?
Yes.
Well, there you go.
Yeah. I did learn a fact that blew my mind a couple of years ago, that the oranges in California have to be shipped to Florida and then they get regulated, then come back to the grocery stores in California. And that inefficiency in the orange market is absolutely insane from some bureaucracy.
Yeah. Well, the fuel to ship them is going to really go jack up the price of food supply.
And I
But
think
isn't
that's
that what California was modeled after? Florida? I mean, that's
isn't
how,
that crazy?
yeah, it was marketing itself, with Florida oranges. But yeah, it doesn't surprise me, even though it's extremely inefficient. That doesn't surprise me either.
Yeah, and our supply chain's so inefficient. Why are we buying gas and oil from Russia when we have so much reserves here in America? It doesn't. What are we doing?
It's a good question. I don't know. I know that if you're buying fuel, it doesn't really matter where you buy it from because the world market for fuel is fungible. So it doesn't really matter who you buy it from. It's all going to end up, in the marketplace somewhere.
Yep. Yeah, are we buying it and reselling it to China and undercutting Russia's direct to China? Like, I'd like to learn more about this energy market of how the actual, because our dollar is based off of the oil prices.
Doesn't Russia have a border with China?
Yep.
They can truck it to China. Of course, you wanted tankers, so I don't know.
Does anybody here have solar panels or own
do.
a Tesla?
No.
You have a solar panels?
I have 2 Teslas on order.
Yeah.
And I own solar panels. I decided not to buy the Tesla last year because I'm waiting for the bigger batteries that they just put in the new Teslas.
Nice. The only reason why I'm asking is because my cousin, I told her, oh, I saw these these old Teslas for sale and they're quite affordable. And so she said, try and get the newer Teslas just because the programming is what needs to be updated year after year. And, I'm sure you guys all know about this, but she said the life of the battery won't last that long if you buy a used one. However, she asked me, and it's so funny too, she goes, do you have solar panels? And I'm like, God, I wish. But she used to have solar panels in her old house. And she said the solar panels actually charged the Tesla faster. Right now, she's, of course, got her own supercharger at home. But I just thought that was really interesting that solar panels would actually charge a Tesla faster. And I was trying to wrap my mind around how does that even work? And why don't we all have solar panels?
Well, it's not that it's going to go faster. It's going to give her house more electricity because you have to do a higher voltage for Teslas. And that's what you have to buy a special charger to charge the car because it's like if you buy a big washing machine, it takes a different voltage.
Uh-huh.
So I think what she's saying is she has more electricity coming in than just the electricity from the grid. She also has the solar, so it's doubling her electricity, which she can use a larger charge to charge it faster.
Yeah, that's exactly what she's saying.
Is it a 240 volt charging system on a Tesla?
I think, yeah, and they do have a higher voltage too. They have a supercharger ability.
Yeah.
But that's the standard. That's what we have in front of our house is a 240 volt. So if you get a car, come visit and we'll try and charge you up and see if you get a good charge.
Right?
Out.
Well, you said you have a Tesla on order.
Yeah.
Did you find that it's like a lot more affordable when you order it from there as opposed to getting it, like for instance, there's used Teslas on CarMax, but I feel like it's a lot more affordable, and it just makes more sense to buy it from the actual Tesla showroom.
Yeah,
Hi,
I think,
Stacy.
yeah, the other thing when you start going electric is you have to, this is what I would advise. You don't have to, but if you go to an Excel spreadsheet and put in how long you travel in your car, like check your mileage rates on your current car. And when you take those long trips, and just amortize the cost of electricity, because you won't really make any savings for about 3 to 5 years. So you're going to pay more in the beginning, but over a 5-year period, you'll end up saving more.
Right.
And that's with all of solar. You pay $20,000 to get solar on your roof. Well, you could take that $20,000 into a savings account or an investment account, use that for electricity, probably, it even out over 10 years. But after a certain period of time, you start saving, much like buying a house. You've got expenses and loan payments, but over time, you end up doing better than renting. But right away, it's cheaper to rent than it is to buy. So do your cost analysis is what I'm saying before you get an electric car, because you also have to cost in your time and the time that it takes 45 minutes to an hour to charge up. You have to look at that on trips, because some charging stations are going to suck and it's going to say 5 to 10 hours to charge up your car at a crappy charging station out in the middle of nowhere.
Right. But that's not really what I was asking. When you said you were ordering you have a Tesla on order, did you get that straight from the Tesla factory?
Straight from Tesla.
Okay. This is kind of linked to the question about economy too, and how I just kind of don't understand it. But it seems to me that ordering it directly from the factory is a lot cheaper than ordering it like a used one from another showroom, like for instance, Toyota. Like Toyota's got a used Tesla.
What's the cost they're giving you for the used one?
Well, it's probably like, if you've got a 2020 Tesla 3, and just making up numbers because I've been up all night, but let's say it's like $50,000 at Toyota for a 2020. You look in the Tesla site and it's almost like the same thing, but for a newer one. And I just don't get that. But I don't know. Just don't listen to me. My brain cells are kind of depleted. Again, I was up all night, so.
Welcome to the club.
Yeah, don't buy where it's cheaper, buy where it's more convenient for you. And it's kind of like buying an Apple computer. You can buy directly from Apple, or you can go to Costco, but usually the price is the same. Best Buy, Costco. Just think of it like buying a phone. If anyone's charging you $1,400 for a phone you can buy directly from Apple for $1,200, buy it from Apple.
Yeah.
But
so now we're all shooting the shit, right? It's like 10:20.
Yeah, I would also say buy a different electric car that's used, that's cheaper, and see if you like electric cars, or just rent one for a trip. See how it goes. That's would be my advice. I wouldn't go directly just to buy one, because it's a completely different device than a combustible engine car.
I know mine is more like practicality. So I drive every day from here to Somis. And it takes probably about 40 minutes round trip without traffic. That's round trip. Every other week I go to Long Beach. That's another 3 hours on top of that. Maxwell wants to get into acting. So I'm guessing that if he actually gets represented, we're going to be going to Los Angeles. I like to travel, and I will travel with my new job. And that's another miles on top of miles. I totally get it when you can't really take a Tesla all the way to Las Vegas. You're going to have to charge it somewhere, or an electric vehicle for that matter. But kind of inner city traveling on a daily basis, it's a lot more practical for me to get either a hybrid or a full-blown electric car, especially with the gas prices. And I feel like it's just going to get worse.
Yeah. Well, I have to hook you up with my sister because my nieces would go to the Malibu Playhouse to learn acting, and they were with a really good group. And
Please, yeah.
I would have to drive her to Malibu from Oxnard all the time, and that was quite the journey. So it's a lot. Like, I would not recommend to anyone to get their kid into acting because I'm not saying that you shouldn't, but I wouldn't recommend it because it's a lot of driving around.
Yeah. Well, we did it with Damien for a couple of years, and Maxwell too. And it is a lot of driving around, but I'm trying to give him some opportunities. And if he doesn't like it, he doesn't like it. Just like with Damien, it's like we got all the headshots, he got represented, we got some workshops and everything, drove him everywhere, got a Kukin account, made sure his grades were good enough. And then one day he was just like, yeah, I don't want to do it anymore. And then we stopped. So same with Maxwell. He's a lot more artistic, and he likes to sing and he likes to dance, and he's very entertaining and very outgoing. So I figured, well, if I'm going to give his brother an opportunity, I might as well give him an opportunity too. It's just a little harder now that it's just me.
Yeah. Well, maybe you can do a YouTube channel with some friends or a group of people in Ventura or Sumas, like do their own little acting group. That's what I recommend. That's what my nieces end up doing. They have some friends in Santa Paula that, have written things and have, are in the industry and have a production company. So they let the kids act at the production company.
Okay, hold on. Oops, I have to put you guys on mute.
Harry, are you going to get into acting? Yeah. I think your mic is off.
Sorry, I turned it off. I have a space heater, which I think is making background noise. Not really. I mean, I'm a presenter of academic material, but I'm not a performer of thespian content. I'm not a storyteller.
Are you going to stick a camera on yourself and start recording some of your great teachings? And do you know the guy from Smarter Every Day? Have you seen that channel on YouTube?
I may have seen a few episodes of it, but I don't haven't been watching it regularly. No.
Yeah, he's been doing some really good. His dad is the one that worked on the James Webb. He's a metric person. He does metrics, and he had to measure the solar shields. His job was to create those shields.
Wow.
And he could. Yeah,
it's a nice piece of engineering. The James Webb Telescope is such a remarkable piece of complex engineering. It just knocks my socks off. And I look at that and I go, why don't we have people like that running the world?
That's this guy. I want this guy to run the world. He met Obama from his show, and he just started a little, that little Smarter Every Day. Let's take a high-speed camera, look at average things in the world, bear accurate witness with, 300,000 frames a second or something, like 40,000 frames a second. And that's what I want to see. That's what I decided to dedicate my life recently, is to, instead of doing just websites, I want to do 360-degree video. Yeah. So I can bear accurate witness, not just this millimeter, but 360 degrees around me.
Yeah.
Start reshooting all the things around us so we can actually see what's around us, because we don't have 360 vision.
Reckoning things in three-dimensional space is a lot harder than reckoning them on a flat, screen. This is an interesting thing to try. Point your finger in some direction and then do, if I can do it, this motion. It's like a figure eight, except it's in 3 dimensions, because sometimes up, sometimes down, sometimes left, sometimes right, sometimes forward, sometimes back. And you can do it mirror image with both hands. Okay. This, I think, is the geometry of spin 1/2 electrons.
Hmm.
The magnetic moment isn't fixed in space. The magnetic moment is precessing and nutating in 3 dimensions. And so you have plus 1/2 and minus 1/2. So every rotation in one is 2 rotations in the other, or vice versa. It's like a 1-to-2 ratio of how many times did you go this way versus how many times did you go that way versus how many times did you go that way. And one of them is 2 times and the others, I think, are 1 time. And that's why it's called spin 1/2. And that ought to be something that you can demonstrate.
Well, I don't know if I told you this. I do Polynesian fire spinning. That's one of my favorite things to do. And I take the fire on a rope. It's a piece of Kevlar on a chain, and I spin it with both hands. So I do both.
And it doesn't wind up.
If I mess up.
The whole point is that notice that even though my wrist is rotating, my arm is not winding up.
Well, actually on the chain, there's a bearing that lets it spin.
Oh, that's different.
Yeah. You have to have that.
The whole notion here is that this motion looks like spinning in some sort, but it's not spinning. It's what they call a spin-or, because it winds and unwinds. And so you have a sort of an illusion of some kind of a cyclical motion, spinning motion, but in fact, my arm is not winding up. It winds and unwinds.
Yep. Because of
Yeah. And it took somebody of the caliber of Paul Dirac, to figure out that the electron's so-called spin, which generates the magnetic moment, isn't spinning at all. It's going some kind of a 3-dimensional dance. It's kind of like a figure 8 in 3 dimensions.
Barry, have you read Eric Weinstein's paper on geometrical unity?
No.
I think that's what he was trying to get at too, and trying to find the supersymmetry in the universe,
right?
Letting it be an emergent property,
right? And you have to do this in 3 dimensions. If you try to do it in 2 dimensions, you try and do something like a figure 8, which is not the same thing as this 3-dimensional one. It's geometrically more subtle and sophisticated. And turned out that, I mean, the physicists spent a century trying to understand what the hell does spin 1/2 mean, and 3/2. So this half, turns out, see, a top spins, but it also precesses.
Right.
But it can not only precess, it can also nutate. So the angle of precession so now you need to do it in 3 dimensions. And actually it can be very complicated. That is something that wasn't taught in physics.
Yeah.
They didn't try to show you a 3-dimensional animation of what an electron's spin vector or magnetic moment was doing. But I think it explains all these crazy experiments like the Stern-Gerlach experiment, which really puzzled people. Like, how can that, it doesn't make sense. But in fact, it does if you.
Well, I think you nailed it when you said, our job is to bear witness. If we're studying things and modeling things in an inaccurate model, then we're getting inaccurate information. When we look at wave formats of light, we look at them in 2D mostly. Most of the time, we're looking at a wave cresting and falling, not moving forward and back in 3 dimensions.
Right. That whole notion that a photon is an electric field oscillating this way and a magnetic field oscillating actually in phase with it, but the whole thing is traveling. And that's Maxwell's equation is the solution to the photon. That really knocked my socks off, but that was very complicated calculus.
Is that what Tesla was trying to do, is to understand the different movements of the wave of electricity?
I don't know to what extent. I mean, Tesla would have had Maxwell's equations available because Maxwell's equations predate Tesla, but whether Tesla really could wrap his brain around Maxwell's equations, which says, here's an electric field oscillating like this. And that generates a magnetic field oscillating perpendicular to it. But that system doesn't agree with Maxwell's equations unless the whole packet is moving at the speed of light perpendicular to these two. And the notion that the only speed at which they can move, which preserves conservation of energy, that it doesn't gain or lose energy, is the speed of light. Speed of light comes right out of Maxwell's equations because this packet can only exist indefinitely if it's also in motion.
Right. The electron can't stop.
Right. And so this notion of the spin 1/2 is a perpetual motion of an electron, but it has to have this property that they end up calling spin 1/2. But that's a name that just, like your brain goes, what the hell is that?
Well, that's why I got so, I'm very much a lover of geometry. And then when I found cymatics, it kind of blew my mind. If you take sand and sprinkle it on a metal plate and change the vibrational tone, you get these patterns forming, literally emerging. Yeah,
standing waves. You get standing waves on the plate, and you can get standing waves in 3 dimensions. And in a sense, the motion of an electron in an atomic orbital is a standing wave.
Yeah, and when I look at snowflakes, crystallization emerging. I watched a video, I think it was on, I don't know if it was Veritasium or Smarter Every Day.
Yeah.
But he was changing the metrics of barometric pressure.
Yeah.
And changing the amount of moisture in the air to create his own snowflake. So he had a device that could change weather pattern in the crystallization.
It's like a cloud chamber. They use cloud chambers to study the motion of particles. And the thing about a cloud chamber is they never talked about how do you make the clouds in the cloud chamber. It's how to use the clouds in the cloud chamber to see the trajectory of a subatomic particle, that's either a straight line or it's an arc.
Yeah. Well, I think what you said was pretty profound the other week when you said, why don't we fall through the earth? Why do we fall through clouds?
Right.
I don't think enough people really spend time understanding the basic building blocks of our reality in terms of tension and magnetics and gravity.
Yeah.
Because it is amazing that we don't just fall through the floor. Like right now, I'm not falling through the wood.
Right. And it's only because the electron doesn't sit still, because the electron is super tiny. So it fills the space with this kind of dance, this 3-dimensional space filling orbital cloud that takes this tiny little particle, and at very high speed, it fills this space and therefore creates a impenetrable electrostatic repulsion. And if the electron were just sitting there, we would just fall right through it, because it would be like, a mote of dust just sitting in the air, and that doesn't block anything. But if this mote of dust is doing some kind of a Tholian web, it's almost like a Tholian web from Star Trek, it's a space filling dance.
Barry, if I wanted to study the properties of why electrons are shared, of how electricity is created, where the electron is leaving that atomic structure, going into the next one, and then creating a vacuum, and then the next one going into that, and that movement that creates electricity, where would you recommend, or what book would you recommend reading that goes deeper into depth of the sharing of electrons through atoms?
So you're talking about
just how electricity works.
Well, of course, the electrons, a single electron actually doesn't travel with the current. It only travels a little ways, and then it's like that thing with the knocking the balls. Each electron knocks the neighbor. So the energy moves along by bing, 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 each one knocking the neighbor. The single electron does not move. In fact, it can't move that fast. So the electric energy moves at about 1/10 the speed of light. But the individual electrons are only sort of oscillating back and forth locally, and then banging into their neighbors like that.
Which is why atoms, right? Meaning like nickel versus different conductors of that electron movement.
Yeah. So in a metal, you have a free electron that is only loosely bound to the nucleus, and it can knock into the free electron in the neighboring atom. So those free electrons can travel more than the normal distance away from their nucleus, but no single electron is actually moving Like if you had a beam of electrons in a vacuum, they're not moving like a beam in a vacuum. They're knocking into this, because metals are solids. They're knocking into their neighbors.
Well, is a laser moving that way though? Meaning it's going so fast that it has to.
So a laser those are photons, and photons again are these things that move literally and move at close to the speed of light, because they're packets of energy. In a sense, an electron is a packet of energy too, but the electron itself is, isn't moving at the speed of light. It'll sit there. Electron can just sit there. Like you rub a balloon, you got electrons on the surface, you get these excess electrons. They're just sitting there. They're not moving around the surface of the balloon. They're just sitting there attached to the rubber molecules. So you have to take into account fermions, which are electrons, and bosons and photons, and they all behave differently in terms of their dancing, their motions. And in particular, this the spin-or thing is the hardest one to figure out, because it's three-dimensional. Looks like rotation, but in fact, it's not really rotating in the sense of that kind of rotating. It's like precession.
Right.
Precession, there's a rotation here, but my finger, my arm isn't rotating. It's just the direction is changing in this precession angle. So Feynman actually thought that precession and nutation were both present in the motion of an electron, but he didn't have a picture like I think is going to turn out to be the correct picture. But what astonishes me is that Dirac had it worked out. And why don't we have a good animation of spin-or spin 1/2? I mean, I've asked people like Ethan Siegel, and he kind of shrugs.
Is it because we just don't understand it enough to model it?
I'm not sure. Maybe the models simply don't agree with the measurements. Maybe the models are sort of suggestive, but not technically correct. Because if you look at the orbitals of electrons in an atom, you get a dumbbell-shaped orbital, you get a spherical-shaped orbital, and you get these kind of strangely shaped cloud. The clouds are not, simply shaped. But yeah, there is a kind of a figure 8 or dumbbell-shaped orbital at one level, and they're all solutions to Schrodinger's wave equation. All of these funky little things can be written down as examples of Schrodinger's wave equation, but then try to do the math, and your brain just goes into overload.
Yeah, that's why I love the geometry. Like there's videos where you take a dumbbell and you use, like a gyroscope, you spin it.
Right.
And then it's easier, it's 80 pounds, but you can carry it over your head when it's spinning.
Right.
The way that, just to really understand gravity a little bit more, there's also another video where you, in space, they had a nut that they were screwing out and it's spinning.
Right.
You see, what's
and
that?
It flips. It's like a tippy top. It flips and then it flips again and then it flips again. And the explanation has to do with angular momentum, but because it's in 3 dimensions, it's really non-intuitive. Even when you sort of work out the math, you go, that's astonishing. Like who would have thunk it?
Yeah, I think there's things going on at the smallest level that are really like, that's just to quote Richard Feynman, if at the smallest level of a particle, the things that happen here, you cannot equate them to things that happen here because it's different.
Right.
It's so different at that level. And that's why I'm so fascinated by sacred geometry, is because there's some sort of intrinsic level of programming in a seed that makes a tree grow at mathematical angles you can measure when it branches out. Those are very clear mathematical.
It has to stay balanced or it's going to fall over. If a tree is unbalanced, it's going to fall over.
But who programmed the seed? How does the seed know?
Yeah, I think if by trial and error. I think the seeds that were programmed incorrectly didn't survive, and the ones that were accidentally programmed correctly survived, because it was parallel. There was like millions and billions of different variations, and the one that was balanced was the one that survived, reproduced. Did you just freeze? Look like you froze it. Yeah, you're frozen again.
I think
Now
I'm
you're
back.
on. Yeah.
Yeah.
So anyway, the thing is that this physics stuff is graduate level physics, and you get 1/10 of 1% of the college students ever bother to look at it, and the rest of the population just says quantum, and it's a magic word. and they use these poetic metaphors that don't really explain anything, that kind of hide the geometry.
To me, the good news is GPT-4 is out now. It's in beta testing, and it's a new layer of putting in machine learning. And people are talking about using quantum computers to actually calculate things, and I think we're ways off from that. But
the thing is that they decohere so quickly. They need to get the decoherence time, long enough to do a few thousand instructions before you've lost the statistical coherence.
Yeah, to me, it's analogous of these high-end cameras. If you can do 20,000 frames a second, that's a real different understanding of reality.
Yeah.
But at 400,000 frames a second, like I remember being at MIT as a kid, and there was that famous picture of the bullet going through the apple that you would see all the time.
Oh yeah, right. The stroboscopic photos that. What was his name? Can't forget the guy's name now.
Yeah. Well, now we can do that on our iPhones.
Yeah, but you're still limited by the resolution of the photon. So electron microscope can see finer detail than a photonic microscope.
Right.
And so you can't see anything smaller. It's like touch. You can't touch anything smaller than the size of your fingertip. So you have the bluntness of your sensor, which is the limiting. So even a photon is blunt because it can't see anything smaller than its own wavelength.
Well, I think we're getting better microscopes.
Well, we have electron microscopes which can see down to the resolution, which means an electron microscope can image a molecule.
Yep.
Whereas you can't use a photonic microscope to image a molecule because the electron is what's sending off the photon. So the photon is the electron is smaller than the photon, the wavelength of the photon. So so the electron microscope was a big advance. And after that, I don't know what neutrino microscope, I don't know what's going to come next.
I don't know. I haven't yet used LiDAR, but I do want to start measuring things with LiDAR.
Well, yeah, self-driving cars have LiDAR.
Yeah, but the iPhones now have LiDAR. All the new iPhones.
They do. Okay.
Yeah. And the iPads, they put LiDAR in sensor in the back of the iPads.
Yeah. I'm still using, this Android, this Motorola Droid Turbo 2 Droid. My neighbor gave me this when he retired it, and I just for $11 put in a new battery. I didn't pay anything for the unit, and I had to pay less than $20 to put a new battery in it. So,
well, if you want to get one of these are what I was talking about. These are the 360. They're really small, and they're waterproof. It's a little 360 camera.
Yeah.
So it's this side and that side.
That's cool. Yeah.
And it's got a little mount at the bottom. You can mount it. And it does pretty good. Like I'm very impressed with the functionality. Just even the grip of how they made a nice little grip. It's rubbery.
Yeah.
And if you press this button, it'll quickly start and record, catch things quickly.
So is that just a camera, or is there also a smartphone?
Just a camera. Bluetooth to your smartphone, and then you can store. It's got a memory card. You can pull into your smartphone and then do editing because it's so much information. It's hard to put it back on our screen, like our screen here.
Yeah, that's super. So it's basically a camera.
It's camera. That's it. what I'm excited to find is they have 3D projection mapping of viewers. Basically, you know, like you can, when you watch a movie, it projects out. These ones can map to different areas. So if you take in different parts of the image and map it to different parts of projection,
So
that's where
you get a little more like 3D immersion experience.
yeah, I want to build those Buckminster Fuller domes and watch a movie in 360 degrees by projecting it out to the whole dome.
Yeah, it's a little bit like Omnimax movies, except that's only most of the sphere, but not, you know, it's like more like a hemispherical screen.
Yeah, wouldn't it be fun if it was a complete 360, meaning
Yeah,
the bottom and the top, and you're floating in the middle and you can look
right.
every.
Yeah,
That's
AT&T had an exhibit at Disneyland where the screen was a hemisphere. You sat on, you were standing on the floor and you were covered by a complete hemisphere. And so the image was projected on all around you and up, but not down, only from horizon upwards.
Yeah, I think that's where I got my imagination from, was going to Disney World in, I think it was 1980, 1979.
Yeah.
Whenever my grandparents took me there, and I would just remember like this feeling of I was floating, but I really wasn't. They were just projecting like we were flying. And now I have those Oculus. If you take this camera and you put it on a drone upside down,
Yeah.
you can fly it through the Dolomites in Italy. And now I put on the Oculus and I am there. Basically, if I had the smell, because it has the sound. So if I had smell sensors to recreate the smells, I'm pretty much there. You know, I mean, as the resolution increases.
Yeah, and because it's much smaller than your body, it can maneuver in ways that your physical body cannot.
Oh,
Yeah.
Barry, if you haven't flown any of the new drones, they're so much fun. You can put the glasses on.
Yeah.
And you can fly the drone as if you're looking out the cockpit.
As if you were a raven or something.
Yep.
Or a hawk.
That's when I'm like, I just did a flight last week on the wildflowers here in California just started blooming. So I was trying to fly it in a way that would be visually appeasing my senses looking at the television screen. And so there's certain angles that are just boring, but there's some where you're going level to the flowers and then you lift up. So that the angle, like, I don't know if you've ever done cinematography, but it's really important to get the camera to do angles that immerse you into the actual space.
Yeah. So you get a sense of the three-dimensional space.
Yeah, that's the difference between good production and bad production is camera movement.
Yeah.
Because if it's shaking or if it's like from here and here, and then and how you edit it too is the flow. You might get a shot that goes here, but then the next edit coming out of that shot is a big part of storytelling.
Yeah. I remember when they first came out with a drone video, and there was some kind of a choreographic big dance routine, and it was all done with a single take of a drone. So it was at eye level, and it sort of moved around, and then it towards the middle or the end it went up high, and then
is that the Bjork? Is that there's a video, Spike Jones did it. It was called So Quiet by Bjork.
I don't think it was that one. I think I don't know if it came before or after that, but it was one of the very first really long choreographed videos that was done with a single take of a drone over a huge space. I mean, it's a space the size of a football field. And I think might have been done in Asia, I think, Japan or China or someplace. But yeah, now a lot of people do that. But you know, the first time that you saw that, it just knocked your socks off.
Yeah, well, I'm watching the Olympics and the Chinese thousands of drones and having them be like,
the blinky drones, yeah,
three-dimensional things in the sky. Like,
yeah,
that's to me still that's quite mind-blowing, the amount of precision that it takes to coordinate every one of those things in the space of three-dimensional space.
Yeah, choreography with thousands of drones in space.
It's amazing. Have you seen it? It turns into a dragon animated moving.
Oh, yeah, I haven't seen that. I didn't watch the Olympics this year, but yeah, I've seen other halftime shows, Super Bowl halftime shows from a few years ago. They were doing things with this drone swarm of drones.
Yeah.
Oh, I think they had to record those in advance at night. They couldn't do them live in the daytime because you couldn't see the drones in the daylight.
Yeah, there was a really interesting podcast. I think I'm trying to remember the guy's name, Dan Harmon. It's like one of those history podcasts.
Mm-hmm.
And they invited Elon Musk to come on and talk about the technology of war and how, just having a catapult really changed the entire history to be able to projectile an object that far.
Yeah.
So you didn't have to be close to things. And I think we're just too advanced to have war. What do you think, Barry? Do you think
war is obsolete? But the problem is that the theologians know this. I mean, Dalai Lama knows it. The Pope knows it. Desmond Tutu knows it. But people like Putin and Trump and these others, George Bush, they don't seem to understand the war is obsolete. That you end up paying more cost for a war than it was worth.
Yeah.
In the long run, I mean, you have PTSD and wrecking your economy and making the world unstable. And why we can't figure this out, it perplexes me, saddens me, perplexes me. And it's one of the reasons why I don't think it's wise to bring any more children into this world unless and until we solve this problem of violence in the culture, political violence.
Yeah, I heard a good talk about some people that do jujitsu explaining the lessons they learned from putting yourself in a situation where the other person is choking you to death. And that's the practice of jujitsu. It's a wrestle match to get someone under their neck to where they're about to either break a appendage or choke them to death. And then their job is to see how close they can get to it without, like, where they think, okay, I can get out of this. No, I can't. So I have to tap them and say, I'm done.
Yeah.
And putting yourself in a situation that close to death, I think makes you a more humble person. Like I one time, the last fight I got into, I was in my 30s. I picked the guy up. I was in the street. It was a street fight in New York. And I picked him up in a suplex and I was about to drop his head into the cement. And I had him up in the air and I was going backwards. And then I realized this all happened in a split second. If I carry this move through to the end, his head will break and crack open and he will die. And so at the last minute, I moved this way and I dropped him on myself and I took the whole weight on my arm of his body, but he stayed alive.
I don't want to be in that situation. My thinking process is too sluggish to be able to react correctly in high speed in that kind of a situation. I work on very slow problems that take a long time to solve, and there's no real danger except running out of time.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I just realized at that moment, I'm going to take the pain. And then he ended up being okay. And then I was fighting two guys at once, which is really difficult. But then the other guy, came over and kicked me and started hitting me. Yeah. So I had to fight him. And then the other guy, because I didn't take him out, he came over and now I had two people. And it's really hard to fight two people at once. I'm not good at that. You're supposed to take one of them out, which is what I was trained to do. And when I went to take him out, I realized I don't want to kill this person. I don't even know this guy. I'm not even mad at him.
Right.
It's a friend of the guy I'm mad at. I'm not even mad at this guy.
We were playing Dungeons and Dragons last night, and it was a session where there weren't any fights. We were basically gathering information from the characters that were encountering. And there were two guys in the game who just wanted to get into a fight. They were just itching. And finally, the DM says, okay, I'm going to throw some werewolves at you so you can fight them. And then I just sat there and did nothing for like 30 minutes while they fought these dumb werewolves. Like, why are we doing this? This is dumb, And actually, it turned out that the only weapon I had was a crossbow, and it was useless against the world. Didn't do any. I had nothing that could inflict any harm on them, even if I tried. And I go, I would rather do the investigation and figure out what our quest is than just have this dumb battle for the sake of having a dumb battle. What's the point of that?
I think what you just said nails it to me. Is there's misplaced energy. Like I'm watching my daughter, she's got so much just child energy. You know, she just started eating solid foods.
Right.
So now she's filled with different type of ATP. And like she just started having carrots, and carrots have sugar. You know, the peas didn't have as much sugar, but she's got all the sugar energy and she needs to release it. Like it's
go pound sand.
well, I just let her go up and down the steps. Like I let her crawl up the steps, bring her back down, crawl up the steps, or we just dance, or I let her play the drum. She really likes smacking the drum and release her energy that way.
So I don't know. We're a very strange species. Sometimes I think of myself as an alien or member of our species that I don't think the way people in power think.
I wish I would have been taught about the chemicals inside of my body that are firing at all times. I did, as a child, I didn't know that I had multiple chemical reactions that were causing me to feel the feelings I was feeling in terms of happiness or oxytocin or serotonin.
That all came along long after I was an adult, and still pretty crude. I mean, the stuff that we eventually learned when we learned about molecules of emotion was still kind of kindergarten level understanding. I mean, you got thousands of these organic molecules interacting as a system, and you can't just pick any one out and say what that one is doing, because what it's doing depends on what everything else is doing. So it's very complicated. And I think that's why we can't figure out the psychology of these sociopathic, psychopathic autocrats, because the hell, 80 billion neurons, what the hell's going on in their head? Well, whatever it is, it's not healthy for them or for us.
And maybe they've just, like, when you have those pathways that have been happening so long, like I'm a big proponent in studying psychedelics because of its ability to reprogram neurological pathways.
Yeah. Well, if you don't have any well-established patterns, then breaking them up doesn't matter. If you have really good patterns, dissolving them is like dissolving your algorithm that's working and going back to a list of basic, execution commands. That you've lost the algorithm. You've lost the function. If you have a good function, you don't want to lose it. If you don't have a function, it doesn't matter.
That's what someone was saying the other day, is just these bullies or sociopaths were people that didn't have a skill or a function to pathway themselves out of that line of reasoning or thinking. So they started building those neurological pathways that keep them stuck.
They're copycatters. They memorize their way through life by copying the behavior of successful people. Well, that means that they've got to present the problems of successful people to manipulate them into acting out the solution so they can then Xerox it.
Yeah.
And that's a terrible, for people who have to be on the other side of that, that's a terrible thing to have to go through life, having to act out the solution over and over again to these dummies so they can imitate it. But it's the golden rule: do unto others as you would have them. Model the behavior you want them to learn. So you have to keep modeling behavior. When they're behaving erratically, you got to model the correct behavior for them to learn. And sometimes it takes a lifetime for them to learn it, or more than a lifetime.
Or to delete the old learning. Like that's the one. I'm 48. I'm trying to delete a lot of patterns that I've had my whole life that served me in some ways when I needed them at that time. But now that I'm moving into a different time in life, I don't need those patterns. I just want them out of the program.
They're counterproductive.
Yeah.
A lot of our behaviors are maybe useful at an early stage, but then they become iatrogenic, counterproductive, contraindicated, and you got to let them go and replace them by more sophisticated methods. But that's a slow evolutionary process.
Well, that's what I'm learning. The most wise people I admire and revere are the reductionist type of people that simplify. Like Richard Feynman was good at it. He wasn't the greatest, but there's certain people that just take away all the layers of programming
Right.
and get to the base level of reality, which is it's just happening. Like those electrons aren't shooting all the way across. They're just going to the next,
Yeah.
to the next,
Right.
to the
It's a
like we don't
chorus
have to
line.
get from point A to point Z.
Yeah.
Let's just go from A to C.
Yeah.
1, 2.
I mean, think of a chorus line. So the one on the end, you know, lifts her leg halfway up, and the next one imitates that. And this process propagates on down the line, but that leg never moved down the line. It was just the same behavior propagated down the line, and then it echoes back again. And the way the chorus line stays in sync is it goes down the line and then back again, and each one is syncing to the neighbor. And at the end, they're all kicking in unison. Even though you can only see your nearest neighbor, they're all kicking in unison. How the hell do they get in unison? It had to propagate down, reflect back at the end, and propagate back the other end, and eventually they're all doing a high kick in unison. That's a pretty remarkable algorithm.
Yeah, we'll take that same algorithm to the telephone game, where one person clearly communicates, vibrates their eardrum.
Right.
Then you've got to do the next. If there's any mistake in there,
Right.
it distorts.
Right.
And isn't that sociologically, like, if you look at all the different cultures that have created around this world, let's say there was a beautiful, wonderful culture in South America 1,500 years ago, and a group of people came from another place, and they are carrying something that can distort, like a virus,
Yeah.
and it just kills off 1 million people in the jungles of Colombia. Like there's cities of millions of people that were living, thriving, working, warring, doing things, and had their own culture, and it's just wiped off the planet. We'll never be able to learn from them.
Right. Which is why, you know, writing things down. I mean, I learned from people who were alive thousands of years ago because their stuff got written down. And I write my stuff down because if it's any good, people will find it eventually, but they're not going to get it firsthand from me. There's 7 billion people, and they're not all going to get it firsthand from me. How many times can I repeat the same story? I write it down.
Well,
I mean, I would act it out, except that I think this material doesn't come out very good as a oral presentation. I think the math is too subtle. It has to be studied like a textbook.
I mean, I love art because of the fact that the narrative itself has a different medium to convey the message, so that you can have one story, but it can be conveyed in string, or it can be conveyed in a painting of oil, or it can be conveyed in watercolor. It's
Right.
still the same narrative, the same arc.
Yeah.
Like you said, that arc is sometimes just going from like in one 2-dimensional space, but good storytelling is 3-dimensional. It's more, more dialogue, more.
Yeah, it's a pattern, and
Yeah.
you can instantiate the pattern in multiple media, but it's the same pattern. And once you realize the musical pattern and the dialogue pattern and the choreographed pattern, they're all the same, mathematically the same underlying pattern. So the pattern of the chorus line is a very profound pattern, and that's why people will pay money to go to see the Rockettes.
Well, those little blackbirds that the starlings.
Yeah. Oh, the murmuration.
Yeah, the murmuration. I saw a video yesterday of a guy who was trying to capture shapes in the murmuration.
Yeah.
And he mistakenly captured, it was a pretty famous video on YouTube, captured all of the birds forming one giant bird.
So that was a very famous one. There was one frame where the shape of the murmuration looked like a giant image of an individual bird. That's like your fractal, that.
Yeah.
And that's, the fact that this turns up in nature as well as in fractal geometry, mathematics, is pretty astonishing. It's mind blowing.
I just want to study the human. To me, the most interesting thing on this planet is the human being.
Yeah, they're complex.
Like I'm deeply fascinated by our organ system
Our what system? Oh, you froze again.
I feel like there's more systems we have yet to not just acknowledge, but that's why I got into the microbiome, is to understand the bacteria, what it's doing.
No, that's all about systems theory, systems thinking. Systems are very complex.
Yep.
The simultaneous interaction of many autonomous components, and you can create chaos or you can create beauty and everything in between.
That's, I've been saying this for years, and I'm going to continue to say it, is look to the slime mold. If we understand how that does what it does, I think we'll understand the human body a lot more.
Yeah. Yeah. I don't know. I mean, if it's going to happen in my lifetime, it better happen pretty quick, because I've got maybe a dozen years left, and my ability to process information is slowing down as I age. So
Yeah, but that, I don't know. For me, I look forward to getting older, so I just don't have to think as much. I'm getting bored with. I mean, the older you get, the more you just like realize you're never gonna know. Like, I'm watching a cloud form out my window right now, and it's just like I can sit and watch clouds form all day long. These gaseous.
yeah.
It's just sort of, coming over the mountains and forming right now.
Yeah.
But I could spend the rest of my life just watching gas, fluid dynamics. I could become a fluid dynamics. Like, in other words, at some point, you got to just kind of just let it be. Just let it be a cloud and just like, wow, that's fucking cool. Like,
Yeah. Well, I don't know. I mean, the things that I used to find fascinating and would spend hours at, eventually they become banal and boring. You stop learning anything new from watching. It's like watching reruns. How many times can you watch a rerun until you know exactly what's going to happen next? And there's no new information coming in. And I keep looking for some. I keep looking on the news or whatever for some new idea. And when I was younger, new ideas would come along all the time because I didn't have a lot of ideas. Now I'm looking for a new idea. Oh, that's not a new idea. That idea has been executed to its limit, and there's nothing. It's not going to do anything more than it's already done. And I keep looking for the next big thing. And there's no next big thing.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's just because we limit ourselves to the things that are the new ideas. They just seem mundane. Like, I
Froze again. Are you going to unfreeze this time, Mr. Starlink?
3 testing.
Now you're back.
There.
Yeah. Yeah.
I was just saying, a copy of a copy of a copy of a copy seems boring, but maybe at the 800th iteration, it becomes the new thing.
Yeah, and the thing is, are you going to watch it for those 800 times without, basically brain turns to mush before the unusual emergent event occurs, and that's it. You stop paying attention because incrementally there's no new information until the one at the very end. And so, how long are you going to sit there and watch grass grow until it finally turns to seed?
Yeah. That's what I do with the internet and with my technology understanding, is just sometimes I take a break for 4 or 5 years and wait for new emergent to happen.
Yeah, and that's pretty much it. I think the internet, is going to take a break because the social networks turn into the anti-social networks. And people are dropping off of Facebook like crazy. There's less and less traffic and less new and interesting things. And people,
well, that's from your perception, because the entire generation of Generation Z, they dropped off of Facebook 10 years ago.
yeah, that's when I sort of
They moved to Snapchat in 2012.
Right, and TikTok and whatever. So I don't know. I mean, maybe something will come along that will grab my fancy, but it hasn't. It's not here.
Well, I think your generation, like the baby boomer generation, they got onto Facebook around 2014. Like on a large number.
I think I was on it more like 2007.
You were, because you're ahead of the curve. I'm just saying the like, if you do that bell curve,
Yeah.
The baby boomers all were there. Like I knew it was there when my dad, who he's a writer and doesn't even have a phone or a computer, he got on Facebook in 2014. And I was like, that's the end. That's
Yeah.
when everybody's on there.
Yeah, it's over now.
Yeah. And his girlfriend is the one that put him on there. He didn't do it himself. And my brother didn't do it. His friends put him on there. So
We shall see. And the next thing will come along. And
well, I think the next thing is spatial audio in the metaverse. And that's what I use Clubhouse for. It's just a random groups of people talking about different things in rooms. And they're using new technologies on how you can invite people. So friends of friends, just your friends, only, you know, it's really getting interesting the way we're forming these communities and conversations organically. And it's really died down in terms of new people coming in. So everyone's had a chance to meet each other, and they're forming these really interesting structures between like quantum photonics talk, consciousness, absolute idiots that just want to be heard. And like these different interesting conversational technologies are forming. But it really is the metaverse because you're not there. It's in your ears, and they have spatial audio now, so you can hear when someone's talking.
it's like the microphone with 9 actual directional mics on it. You know.
Yeah. So just imagine, Barry, very soon you go, once there's enough people connected like Facebook, you go into a thread of Facebook thread, and you press a button, and everyone's in a room talking about that thread instead of texting.
Yeah.
That's the world I live in. I wanted to get off of the threaded conversation on Facebook and move into the audio conversation. And that's where I'm at now. Is I can go into Discord servers, Elementor, I can go into Clubhouse, I can go into Twitter Spaces, and there's new ones popping up every day.
Yeah.
And any subject I want, I can just type it in, and boom, someone's having a live conversation on that subject.
You're a good listener. Everybody in my family has a listening disability. So the sound comes in, but I don't process it in real time. It takes me longer to process a sentence than it takes to utter it. And so I don't actually acquire the information very efficiently. So spoken language is kind of lost on me.
Can I let you in on a little trick that I learned, Barry?
What's that?
Like my sister used to read really fast, and I read really slow, and I was taught to understand every word in the sentence, piece it apart, understand the dynamics of the sentence before you move on.
Yeah.
I did the same with listening, and I was a terrible listener. And then I realized not to try to understand every bit of information, but to do your best to just let it come in slowly. In other words, I might seem like a good listener, but if you ask me to repeat back, I'm not getting as much information as I should be, because my mind, I go into wandering. I start thinking I'm not the greatest listener, but I'm trying to be a better listener.
Yeah. I joined Toastmasters not to become a better speaker, but to practice my listening skills. I have to tell you, most of the talks in Toastmasters are quite forgettable little speeches.
Well, I guess what I'm saying is a lot of times people are thinking out loud, which is what I do 90% of the time. I've learned here at GCC to, if I'm thinking out loud all the time, no one's going to be able to follow along with me unless they're close friends who we've been talking throughout the week with.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's why when I speak, I prefer to revive something I've already written about, because it means I've already thought about it. And if I haven't thought about it, then talking about it is going to be just verbiage.
But that's an art too, shooting the shit and just talking bullshit. That's another art form.
I suppose it is. I don't know. I don't consider myself an artist at that.
Well, for emergent phenomenon to happen, you need the randomness of the bullshit talk sometimes to bring up an emergent. Whereas if you've already thought about it, you're just repeating back old lines of things.
Yeah. Well, anyway, it's 2:15 here on the East Coast, and I probably should eat lunch.
Yeah, well, thanks for just shooting the shit and bullshitting with me, because I enjoy it. So thank you.
All right, so we'll see you on the next occasion, either tomorrow or next week or whatever.
Yeah, and I'm gonna look into this. I need to understand electricity on a deeper level. I need to go deeper on it because it's important
Yeah, it is. Well, okay.
for me. For me, I'm saying because I'm in this new solar punk world where everyone wants to be solar and electricity, and I need to really understand electricity. I think it's important.
Go back to Maxwell's equations, I guess. I don't know.
I'm gonna check it out.
All righty. I'm
Have a
gonna
good day.
close this down. All right, thanks.
Right.
See if I can
Thanks
do a
again
leave.
for
Yeah.
listening, or anyone in the future. Thank you. See you later, Barry. Cheers.
Leave meeting. I can't close meeting for all. Okay.